Sorry for the slight intermission, but we just need to get reset. Thank you for your patience. So we move on to our first panel discussion on the topic of accelerating sustainable infrastructure delivery. Speakers will be discussing how the infrastructure within the NDP and the other government strategies, from climate action to water to housing, can be delivered more efficiently, sustainably and, crucially, cost-effectively. Each of our panellists will speak for around 3 minutes on the facet of this topic relevant to them. I'll then facilitate a discussion between the panellists to tease out some of the most pressing issues. So let me introduce you to our panel. First over here we have James Kavanagh of Varming Consultant Engineers. Then we have David O'Brien, Office of Government Procurement. Jerry Grant, who many of you will remember from Irish Water, now the chair of Dublin Port among his many other roles. PJ Rudden, chair of the Construction Sector Innovation and Digital Adoption Group. And finally, Pia Feeney, Government and Infrastructure Strategy and Transactions with EY. I'm still going to call it Ernst & Young, I'm sorry. So our first speaker is James Kavanagh, CEO of Varming Consulting Engineers, one of Ireland's leading sustainable mechanical and electrical building services consultancies. He's also a former president of our hosts here today, the ACEI. James is an expert in advanced energy and environmental modelling for sustainable design, including renewable energy, low-carbon technologies and smart energy management. He'll talk about his experience as president and what the sector requires to maintain its position at the forefront of sustainability and the delivery of infrastructure. So James, if you stay seated and just give us your 3 minutes on your views.
Okay. So I suppose this is my first let's say, outing as ex-president. So I handed over last week to Anne-Marie. And during the year, I was quite taken in terms of, you know, what the issues are, what's going to make the difference over the next couple of years, who's going to make the difference. And if we looked at the who and the what, in terms of who, I think one of the issues is engineers. Engineers are going to make the difference over the next couple of years. Engineers need to sell themselves better, and engineers need to continue engagement with government bodies and policymakers. They're the who's that's going to make the difference. In terms of progress in those areas, there's been huge engagement, as I said, particularly with groups such as the CSG, the CIC, and that's the root of where the change, if you like, is going to come. We're speaking today primarily about the NDP and how that is going to be accelerated, and the key is engagement. And it's really encouraging the level of engagement that's happened over the last couple of years in particular. We heard earlier on that we need more engineers. That's a fact. There's simply not enough of them. And how engineers play into that is engineers need to have more engineers in the game. And what I mean by that is engineers need to sell themselves. They need to sell themselves, their value to society. And engineers fundamentally it needs to be an attractive profession, and attract more engineers into the industry. But it needs to be seen to be attractive in terms of remuneration. And it needs to be in the public sphere. It needs to be regarded as an attractive profession. So that's really important. So there's a piece there for engineers to sell themselves, to be proud of what they do, and to actually sell themselves to society in general, and to sell the huge contribution that engineers make and not take it for granted, both at home and abroad. It's important, I think, that engineers, particularly in Ireland, they act in they're commercial organisations. They need to have commercial viability in their operations. And there's been huge progress in terms of investment, as I said, and engagement. And that investment needs to be maintained. It needs to be maintained, but as we heard, there's simply not enough engineers to develop that. And that's a stark reality. So what we can do in the meantime is that the engineering firms that we have, the public works contracts need to be attractive to people in the consultancy, and particularly here in Ireland, in indigenous consultancies here in Ireland. And there's been huge progress in terms of engagement. There's still some challenges, but there's been huge progress in terms of engagement. Some of the challenges we heard earlier on in relation to the so-called 1% rule, or the knock-on effect of the 1% rule. But as well as that, the public works contracts, they're going through the next phase, let's say, of engagement is in relation to fees and indexation of fees, and how fees are treated on existing projects and how fees are treated on new projects. So there's challenges ahead, but in terms of engagement, who's going to change, who's going to make the change and deliver on the NDP and deliver on the spending that's involved in the NDP, I think the collaborative approach is still working. The issue is really, which is a good place to be, money is not an issue. People are an issue and policies are an issue, which is a lot better than where we were a couple of years ago.
Absolutely, when we had the people and no work, and we all, as a country, remember the legacy that forced emigration can bring. Thank you very much, James, and thanks for being pretty much to time. Our next speaker is David O'Brien. He's Construction Advisor at the Office of Government Procurement. He's also the chair of the Government Contracts Committee for Construction. As such, he's the Chief Advisor on Public Works and Construction Services Procurement. His background is in architecture, and among his prior roles, he was involved with the National Building Agency for 10 years. So over to you, David.
Thanks, Ingrid. And I suppose I represent the forces of evil, I suppose, is the best way to describe it. But I represent, I suppose, a large and very risk-averse client. The contracts that were developed were brought in 2007 to deliver, I suppose, greater cost certainty. We're in a process of reform on a number of different fronts. James mentioned the areas around fee indexation, but throughout last year we brought through some significant changes aimed at rebalancing risk, predominantly in the public works contract, but also in the conditions of engagement, and we've introduced liability caps for the first time. And these things inevitably take time. You've got to, first of all, bring people with you, and I was very taken with Ronnie's presentation in terms of stakeholders and how you bring people along, and I think I've learned a few things there today. We represent a very wide and diverse organisation. The Government Contracts Committee perhaps belies a very vibrant group of organisations that are responsible for the delivery of the vast majority of the infrastructure, housing and health projects that we see happening. In terms of, just to address, I suppose, the key issue here about accelerating sustainable delivery, amongst the knotty issues of contracts, we're also developing approaches to sustainability. We've laid foundations around that with, it's not terribly interesting at the moment, but I think it will start to bite over the next couple of years about reporting. We report endlessly on cost and progress and so on, but carbon and sustainability are harder things to measure. But the metrics are developing at pace, and I think we're going to see huge changes in terms of the broader procurement process. For many people, procurement is contracts, it's tendering, but for me, procurement begins way before you hit the marketplace. It is about engagement, it's about greater consideration. Sometimes procurement needs to go right back into choice of where the infrastructure is going. It's not necessarily, that dead-end deadline date of tender receipt and all that goes with it. So we're inserting ourselves into the process way earlier. The BIM mandate is a really important plank in that as well. From my perspective as a person who was involved in delivery of projects, information is the lifeblood of every project. Decisions can't get made without information. That information has to be up to date, it has to be reliable. And this is why we're making such a huge push for building information modelling, albeit for many in the room, it will impact on you in the project delivery phase, in the construction phase. But for us, it is about making those decisions, sustainable decisions, much earlier in the process and having information at our fingertips to enable that decision making. Resources is the other point that I would make. From our perspective, the process of project delivery has become incredibly complex, and others will speak to that on the panel. Resources are the key to this, expertise at key areas, an understanding and a briefing for clients at early points to point out where the obstacles are going to be hit, where are the difficulties, to try and address risk at key points along the way. And risk, as we all know in the room, risk manifests itself in many different ways throughout a project's delivery. And clients and expertise in client bodies are critical to that. So that's my contribution.
Thank you very much indeed, David. We now come to our third speaker, Jerry Grant. Jerry is currently chairperson of the board of Outform Consulting. He's an experienced director and utilities specialist on major infrastructure, asset management and utility operations. He was previously managing director of Irish Water with over 700 direct staff and 3,000 staff in local authorities delivering services throughout the country. He's also the chair of Dublin Port Company and previously worked in a senior position with RPS Group in Ireland. Jerry.
Thank you. Looking at the topic, I thought that accelerating sustainable infrastructure begins with selecting the right projects. And one of the areas that I think, and I'm on the Major Projects Advisory Group, when we see the business cases coming through, I think there's a real challenge picking up on what David said around how we evaluate projects, because clearly we can't afford, either in terms of financial capacity or construction capacity, to deliver everything that people would like. So we're going to have to be very clear on how we prioritise projects. And that requires that we're clear on how to model both the economic, social and the environmental and carbon benefits. And I think that's one of the challenges we're going to face, because we're seeing, enormous plans for infrastructure, much of it of questionable sustainability, I would say. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that in developing our projects and bringing them to planning, it's now perfectly clear that the duration pre-planning is much longer than the actual construction period. So I'd like to focus a little bit on that challenge, and I see it across the grid with AirGrid. I see it with Dublin Port in looking at how we expand the port capacity for the future, and I suppose I see it as well at the Major Projects Advisory Group. And I would say the starting point is to recognise that major infrastructure projects are really complex businesses. They require very strong executive sponsorship and clear leadership. That might seem very obvious and it might seem very evident, but it's not always that clear that from the beginning, major complex infrastructure projects get the attention they need in terms of resourcing and upskilling and bringing all the disciplines that you need into the process. You need to ally engineering these days from the very beginning with planning, with communications and engagement. There's a lot of talk today, and I've heard many times already how important engagement is. But the reality of it is in Ireland that you will not deliver a project, a major complex infrastructure project, without broad societal support. And to generate that, you've got to not simply consult and give information, but you've got to listen. Projects, I was involved in a process recently that was meant to be a collaboration between two state enterprises. But the client side of that discussion kept talking about, we'll reach our decisions and we'll inform you and we'll take your opinions. Now, we did a lot of consultation, several rounds of consultation recently on the 3FM project, which is the Poolbeg plans for the southern side of Dublin Port. And I was really very impressed by the way in which the solutions that have been evolved over those processes are demonstrably taking account of the feedback. If you can't see your feedback as an engaged party in the solution that's evolving, you're not going to believe that the process was meaningful and you're not likely to support the project. And the reality of it is that our projects are taking years to come through the process, because I think in many cases we don't mobilize the resources that are required from the beginning. One of the considerations, of course, is cost. If you're going to bring a major project through to planning and you're going to fail, then there's a significant amount of money that potentially is abortive. And the client bodies, and particularly state bodies, don't like to be in that position. So there is a reluctance, and I've seen that in another body that I'm involved in, where there's a reluctance by the parent department to sanction the resources that the agency is looking for in order to deliver the projects. So we really have to consider what we're serious about in terms of the infrastructure projects we want to deliver, really mobilize the teams that are required to do that engage fully and bring all of the disciplines on board so that by the time we get to on board Pleanála, we have every chance of success. We can demonstrate the benefits, the outcomes are very clear, we know the scope of the project, we know the costs, we know how we're going to deliver it in procurement terms, and we're clear that we have the capacity as a client body to deliver it and oversee it. So that would be my focus for at least the initial discussion here on how we accelerate that infrastructure that we want to deliver.
Thank you very much indeed. Excuse me. We now move on to our fourth speaker. PJ Rudden is a chartered engineer and founder and managing director of Angus Consulting Limited. Throughout his career, he's worked on policy, transformation, change management, and project management of major national projects. Those projects range from energy to transport to waste management. He's an external member of the Project Ireland 2040 Delivery Board, chaired by Minister Paschal Donoghue, who we'll be hearing from later. He's also chairman of the Construction Sector Group subgroup on innovation and digital adoption, and most important, he's a former president of Engineers Ireland and the recipient of many awards. PJ.
Thank you. I'm going to deal with accelerating the National Development Plan, and I'm going to discuss it in the context of two aspects. First of all, collaboration being necessary. Secondly, innovation leading to delivery of the projects. And when I came into the role 3 years ago, KPMG had just produced a report, and the recommendations, large number of recommendations, but the four or five key recommendations were to bring innovation into construction. And in what way? First of all, have regard to reducing our carbon emissions by 2030. Secondly, bring in modern methods of construction, because construction used to be a bricks and mortar game. It's not any longer. It's a whole new ball game in terms of the procedures, but also bringing in digital. And we set up a state-of-the-art research engine called Construct Innovate in Galway. And that is a powerful engine in terms of how to accelerate construction, in terms of innovative methods and so on. Planning permissions used to need 4 hard copies of every document delivered to the local authority. You need a truck or a van to deliver some of these. That's all gone now. We've digitized the planning permission system across the 31 local authorities. And finally, most importantly, the basics is the Build Digital project, where we digitize these projects in the NDP and accelerate them. That project is, with the assistance of David and the government procurement people, that we can use innovation again to look at new forms of contract and a more collaborative approach. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, PJ. I thought you were going to run over, but you didn't, so well done. Thank you. We now come to our final speaker, who is Pia Feeney. Pia is a director in the Government and Infrastructure team of EY. She has a particular focus on real estate and social and affordable housing, which, as we all know, is a very pressing issue in Irish society now. She also has 17 years of experience as an asset-backed financier and strategic advisor, and has worked in Ireland, the UK, and the United States. She has broad experience of project, PPP, and infrastructure debt structuring in the bank and capital markets in sectors including multifamily housing, energy, water, and health. Pia is going to speak about overall government investment in infrastructure and what Ireland needs over the next 25 years. Pia.
Thank you, Ingrid. It's actually great to be able to follow my esteemed panelists here, because actually they've done a lot of the setup for me, to be honest. I'm a director in the, as Ingrid said, I'm a director in the EY's government infrastructure team, where we have some 200 people working with public and private sector stakeholders on a number of the infrastructure sectors in the National Development Plan, including transport, renewable energy, broadband, ports, telecommunications, and real estate. And as Ingrid says, my focus is on housing, particularly social and affordable housing. Over the course of the last few years, I've had the privilege of working with government departments and agencies, such as the Department of Housing, Enterprise, the LDA, Greater Ormond Development Agency, and Department of Taoiseach, looking at a number of aspects in relation to accelerating the delivery of housing, improving its sustainability, measuring progress towards those housing targets, and actions to move the construction industry onto that more sustainable and resilient basis. Integral to this is the move to more widespread adoption of modern methods of construction, moving construction and manufacturing processes off-site. And the benefits of this, as PJ has already touched on, are very well known to the audience in this room in terms of speed of delivery, environmental performance of the housing, the lower running costs, quality control, construction productivity, waste reduction, health and safety, as well as putting the attraction of the construction industry or built environment industry to a much more diverse group of the job market. However, realization of the benefits of modern methods of construction really requires a full understanding of the level of collaboration required across all the stakeholders in the whole supply chain. Themes that David and Jerry and James have already touched on, which obviously extends the process at the very beginning of the project. So that I'm referring to all stages of delivery, including design, planning, procurement, and on-site manufacture and off-site assembly. And we all hear that word collaboration, but what does that really mean specifically for MMC and for people in this room? Well, MMC needs knowledge of the timing of procedures across that whole supply chain to plan and enable sites. And that requires a collaboration between utilities providers, procuring authorities, planners, and upfront consultation and pre-market engagement with the private sector as well. That level of what does that mean for the people in this room? Well, the really key point here is that the expertise in MMC integration and how these buildings are assembled on site, as well as planned for upfront, can be is invaluable to this process, and that's where the design teams, of which engineers are such an integral part, really comes in. Everybody needs to know who does what to whom at any stage of the process, so we need to know where roads, it's not just the design of houses themselves that needs to be frozen, but also the location of roads, the civils, the groundworks, the utilities extensions, connection points. All of that needs to be understood and planned for up front, as well, and communicated through the process of tender and award and manufacturing and design installation of units on site for MMC to work smoothly and minimize cost and time delays and really capture the benefits of that accelerated delivery. And that's where the engineers, as part of working alongside architects and QSs, can really work with manufacturers and contractors to agree all those design adjustments up front prior to manufacture and overcome those issues during installation. And it's that collaborative and partnership approach that really is essential to accelerate the delivery and capture the benefits of modern methods of construction. And it also lessens the adversarial relationship that has historically sometimes been the case, particularly around housing delivery, between contractors and procuring authorities, where if that relationship and partnership approach is integrated upfront and planned for upfront, you will actually be able to take a more realistic risk-sharing arrangement, and it's excellent, and it's great to hear from David about that understanding of the kind of level of collaboration and risk-sharing that needs to be integrated into the mindset of everybody planning for these projects and then delivering them. And I think that's where everybody, the engineers in this room, can really help in bolstering that expertise in the design process, particularly for authorities as they move up the curve in terms of knowledge and experience of modern methods of construction.
Thank you very much indeed, Pia. And I can't believe it. Usually I'm like a sheepdog trying to hustle people, but actually we're really keeping to time. So well done. Can I come to you first, David? Why is decision-making so slow? Because one of the things when I was networking inside, having a cup of coffee beforehand, everybody was saying delay, 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 and and it's not just in the delivery on site. The initial, and I can't remember which of you was saying the importance of, I think it was you, Jerry, saying the selection of the right project. Why is this, the decision-making process so slow?
I think Jerry touched on some of the issues quite well. I mean, I'm not involved in project delivery. We're a policy unit, but we are engaged with the main delivery organisations, and they have a frustration as well around governance, particularly the extent of the project reviews. Now, the department have reduced the number of those project reviews, particularly for large projects. But I think it probably comes down to perhaps a lack of expertise in some organisations. Some are excellent and well resourced, but I think it comes down to decision makers. Quite often, perhaps they don't have all of the information. I touched on that earlier on. There's perhaps not enough analysis done up front. Jerry's point about the wrong project and the right project in the wrong place. Quite often.
On the other hand, is there paralysis by analysis?
That is a risk. There's no two ways about it. If you've over governance in some cases, but at the same time, we're not thanked when we get things wrong either. I bear some of the scars for some decisions on some other large infrastructure projects. I mean, I had a peripheral role, but everyone likes to find someone to blame for where something goes wrong. We're not allowed to make mistakes. That's fundamentally it. It's career ending for some people, and I think we need to address that and perhaps have some better instill confidence in those decision makers around.
James, is there a difference between dealing with the public sector and the private sector? When you're running a company and trying to get a project off the ground and, as we said in the topic of this, accelerate delivery, is there a difference?
There's a marked difference from a consultant's point of view, but the reality of it is that to run a sustainable business, I think, you're looking for a mix of projects really, as opposed across the public and the private sector. And then even within those sectors, you're looking to diversify as well, to insulate from, some of the highs and the lows of the construction or the economy. Is there a difference? Yes, there's a difference. I think the challenge is that when consultants every day are making decisions about which project will I actually tender for, which project will I submit for, because there's a lot of time, there's a lot of money just goes into that. They're looking at a risk-reward strategy. And they're looking at where's the risk between project A and project B and which is actually more attractive to me. Now, unfortunately, we're in a situation where what's actually more attractive is actually more economically feasible for you. That's what attractive means in this society, in this business. So you're looking at the risk in, let's say, delays, as opposed to in private sector, projects tend to be delivered quicker. There's actually more, let's say, flexibility in terms of negotiation if projects run over. It's not perfect. But yes, they're the main two differences. And I think as far as infrastructure is concerned, i.e. the National Development Plan and how that's rolled out, the key challenge is to actually swing the dial from because we have, as we said, we've a minimal resources, so there's a more of a focus on what's actually viable and not viable, and the dial needs to swing towards public sector projects, and they need to be made as much as possible, or at least as possible, attractive as private sector projects. For our own sake, generally, for society's sake, in terms of developing the infrastructure within the country.
PJ, would you agree with that? I'll be coming to Jerry in a moment, but PJ, on that?
I would, and public projects, have an audience, and the audience are the people of Ireland. And the whole collaborative approach and, stakeholder engagement is critical to this. And, if you try to push something, there's sufficient delays in planning the projects, which a new bill is set to hopefully reduce. But if you don't have a collaborative approach, you're going to get conflict, and the project runs on. And some it suits some people for the project to run on, frankly. But we haven't got time for that because we have no time to lose. We have a very large 165 billion budget to discharge, and the bulk of it has to be done by 2030. We simply don't have the time.
Well, if I can come to Jerry now. Jerry, you mentioned when you were talking that it's important that a big project has social support, but you were in situ in Irish Water when, if you don't mind me saying so, all hell broke loose. To what extent are we very parochial here? We've had NIMBY objections to housing, we've had, the water protest that we had. Where do you see all of that coming in, and can you actually overcome that with engagement?
Well, I think the job of the client bodies, the public bodies, Irish Water, Dublin Port, or whatever, is to deliver the capacity that's required for the services, and you've got to explain it. I think the Irish Water experience was different in that it was a very political process around the charging. Irish Water has been relatively successful in delivering its capital programs, and this question of delay, I think, is worth analysing because utilities like Irish Water have the capacity to fill the pipeline with 20 or 30% more capacity than they can deliver. That's something we don't do across the public sector in terms of general infrastructure. We tend to, I think the state sector slows down projects to sort of meet budget requirements, whereas the likes of Irish Water will always have a backup of projects. So, for example, the Greater Dublin Drainage Project has been radically delayed because of planning delays and appeals to the courts and so on. But there's been other projects to come in and take up the slack and get on with it.
Would you like to see legislative changes?
I think we need to look at the process that we're delivering projects. I agree that the business case approval process is taking too long, for example. If you look at say, Dublin Port Company, it is a commercial estate company, so it's able to make its own decisions through its own board to get projects to go ahead. I sit on the board of Sport Ireland. We have a project there for a velodrome. It has a strong business case. It's been through planning. It's sitting for 18 months, having got planning, now awaiting approval. That's 18 months that's gone. We would have built it in that time. So
and you've had construction inflation in the meantime.
So there is a question as to whether we need a government, an infrastructure committee or a strong central committee that actually looks to drive projects. I think there's another piece to some of the delays that have taken place. I'm chair of the High Voltage Forum, which is looking at the relationship between the electricity sector and the road sector and trying to expedite grid projects. The roads are seen as a soft option, I suppose, in a way, because society won't accept overhead cables anymore. But the reality of it is it's very complicated to put high voltage cables into roads. I don't think that was fully appreciated, and we've spent the last year and a half trying to develop protocols where both sides understand their respective issues so that we can get the grid developed, because we must get it delivered. But we can't ignore the fact that the roads are important from a societal point of view and a safety point of view and so on. Dublin Port, we've had quite a significant challenge in trying to reconcile how the port evolves with, for example, rail freight and what the future of rail freight is. And there are serious questions there around the economics and in the viability of rail freight. But nevertheless, we've got to try and provide for it. It's taken some time to work that out between Dublin Port and Irish Rail. So the relationship between state companies is very often an important factor in the engagement around how to go forward with a project.
Pia, if I can come to you, you've had experience internationally, and you've heard a lot of what we've said here today. How do we compare internationally? I mean, are we making a bags of it? Are we doing really well? What's your read on that?
In terms of housing delivery, for all the mechanisms to engage the public and private sector that we used in the UK in particular, it's been an absolute petri dish of experimentation for delivery models. They've had a more muted impact than they should. There's been a lot of collaborative work between the public and private sector that has been held up in planning, and that can often, particularly when you're using modern methods, can result in a diminution of the financial resilience of the contractors being provided, and that is a big obstacle. But in terms of how, and I'll move on specifically on housing, but more generally, Ireland has actually had a better per capita delivery record than the UK, which is where most of my experience is. But looking broader than that, you can see infrastructure projects being delivered across Europe much more quickly and much more much more efficiently and at far lower cost.
But how do they do it? Because nobody who's on this panel, nobody in government buildings is deliberately setting out to build them slower and more expensive.
This is a really tricky point. The fact is, if you have plan-led development that is actually championing the best as well as trying to prevent the worst, it has a different change. And if you have a sort of a plan where you've mapped out where your infrastructure and your housing is going to be, and the time for objections is when that plan is being developed, then there is a really big opportunity once that plan is agreed just to move ahead. And I think we see that in a number of countries across Europe, like France, Spain, Germany. There are some stats on how much, and I can't remember the exact figures, it took to deliver railway infrastructure in countries across Europe and also in Japan and in the US. The cost of delivering in the UK, where they were constantly subject to objections, which added to the wiggliness, if you want to put it that way, of the track and roads and cuttings and so on, added an enormous amount of time and cost and fees, quite frankly, to being able to actually execute a project. The cost in the UK is maybe 10 times what can be achieved in countries like Spain and Germany and France, even a factor of 5 higher than it would be in Japan. The only other country that sort of compares from an infrastructure perspective because of this level of objection is the US, and I guess there are some lessons to learn there in Ireland as well, because you really don't, that's not a route you want to go down. We've seen what happened with High Speed Rail 2, which has obviously been incredibly costly and is a real blow in terms of that connectivity across the country and enabling the development of regions, and that was purely due to extensive objections and problems in getting stakeholders, communities to agree. And that, I think, speaks to those points that yourselves, that Jerry and James and PJ David were speaking about in terms of early engagement, communication strategy of the real benefits. Whether that stops people exercising their right to object to something, particularly on the basis of potentially a bat box, is another question. But I guess that's a comparison for Ireland in terms of delivery. It's Spain and Germany and France and countries like that are able to agree a plan and then move quickly when it's done.
In fairness, the high-speed thing, we love that here because it makes us feel good. I'm going to finish up with the OGP. You've heard the comments about the contract. I've heard it repeated outside that there's disproportionate risk or liability and huge concern, and people saying that it's acting as a deterrent to tendering, a deterrent to individual participation. What is the OGP going to do about that?
Well, I just put it to you this way. In terms of project certainty, the aims that were set out when those contracts were introduced first, I don't think anyone would disagree with. Have we achieved that level of certainty? No, we haven't. There's a number of factors behind that. And I think everyone in the room, particularly in the consulting industry, in the consulting sector, would like greater certainty in terms of the terms that they're signing up to, but also the scope of the service, the range, the tasks that they're going to have to deliver. And for many jobs, where, particularly in the large civil engineering space, that certainty just isn't there. So, we are working on mechanisms around that, how we can better engage to give that flexibility. But at the other side of that, there has to be a greater effort to deliver that certainty. We've just spoken about the length of time it's taking, the decision-making process, the planning process. This is just not sustainable on so many levels. So it's you can then look to the contract. What's causing some of those issues is the delays, the uncertainty. So we go back to the feedback loop and we start again, say, how do we deliver greater certainty? I think everyone would appreciate that. Many contractors have said to me that, one thing we can say about your contract, while we don't necessarily like it, we know what it is. In so many contracts that are used in the private sector, many contractors have said to me they have no idea what terms they're signing up to.
How would they not know?
Because the contracts are amended constantly. Additional clauses added in. The legal profession play games constantly to protect their clients' interests. We don't permit that on the public sector side. They're tough contracts. People know that. We've made significant strides, and again, I'm not sure the extent of awareness that, I presented a slide at a CIF event recently where we stepped through the changes, and people were, oh, good God, I didn't know that. And what? I didn't. So there has been significant shift in the contract. It's not suitable for the delivery of every contract. On the infrastructure side, on the big mega projects, the public works, standard public works contract is not being used. On the other hand, there is a form of contract that, has gained traction globally as being collaborative. We're just going to have to wait and see just how collaborative that is. And for many people, I'm not sure that people realize what collaboration truly means. It's effectively being part of a high-performance team where you're challenged every single day to, do what you said you would do. And frankly, the public works contract was set up to do that. Perhaps not terribly successfully, but we'll wait and see how the other collaborative forms get on in the real, apart from the laboratory conditions, the real test.
Well, on that note, I'm afraid I have to call a halt to our activities because we've run out of time and because you're all gagging for coffee. So we'll give you all an opportunity to network, and we'll resume here at 11:10 sharp for our next panel. But before we break up, could I ask you to show your appreciation for our panel, James Kavanagh, David O'Brien, Jerry Grant, PJ Rudden and Pia Feeney. And we'll see you back here shortly.